Good evening. Thank you, Vera. Tonight I want to present a text based on and extending our work in the Daedalus Observatory, the work of me and my students here at the ATTP, in the same titled course and research series, Mobile Yet Immobile. A self exists in a fabric of relations that is now more complex and mobile than ever before. Quote Jean-François Lyotard, The Postmodern Condition, A Report on Knowledge. 1979-2018. Our knowledge has altered, and yet life seems to gain in complexity. Our world has turned, and still the mobility appears to increase in it. And for real, could it even be different? Even though these conditions seem so obvious, so clear, and undoubtedly true for our today's self, their own actual condition remains actually very vague, very formless, and somehow hard to get a grasp on. What is the mobile? What is the immobile? And what could they be for us? Yes, they are complex. In German language, the adjective mobile, English mobile, forms the etymological root for the concept Möbel, whereas its English equivalent, furniture, leads us contrarily to the act of supplying or providing. Its linguistic opposite, immobile, English immobile, in turn informs our understanding of real estate, which itself conceptually partners the German Immobilie with a rightful owner. Having a look into property law then, we can find the movable and the immovable as the basic division of things. Movability here is proved when one can transport a thing without losing its substance, which was also emphasized by Immanuel Kant in his philosophy of law, where he tells further, the first acquisition of a thing can only be that of the soil, and by the soil is understood all habitable land. In relation to everything that is movable upon it, it is to be regarded as a substance, and the mode of the existence of the movables is viewed as an inherence in it. Astronomically instead, our ground counts as mobile itself since Copernicus, and physically since Newton, motion and rest are anyhow conditions of one and the same body. Bodies exist in the play of forces, are understood as being in negotiation, as in Wilhelm Flusser's formulation. A country is apparently an immobile thing, but Poland has moved towards the west. A bed is apparently a mobile thing, but my bed has moved lesser than Poland did. Let's ask again today, how can we think the mobile and the immobile, measure and calculate with them? Following Flusser's line of thinking 25 years ago, our environment consisted of things, houses and furniture, machines and motor vehicles, clothing and underwear, books and pictures, tins and cigarettes. Any catalog of the world of things, whatever criteria are used to set it up, for example, animate, inanimate, mine, yours, useful, useless, near, far, is bound to have gray areas and gaps. And he is one of several thematized that this was about to change with information technology. After them, our environment was about to become ever softer, more nebulous, more ghostly, and to find one's way around it or make a living in it, one will have to take this spectral nature as a starting point. The Daedalus Observatory aims to do so, and in this cloudy notice I will report you from our contemporary lookout, trying to set up a fitter, more abstract and generous criterion by the means of architecture, one which is charged by the condition it has derived from, intuitively measures and is measured by itself, hence will consequently be lesser a fixed standard of judgment than a kind of character or notion to see, think and articulate with, the mobile yet immobile. Indexing a catalogue more like a magical thesaurus than a statistical register, a multi-material choreography, an abstract roundelay, an eclectic show of Pygmalion and power. And in accordance with the casual as pertaining to chance nature of its subject, the investigation is quasi-historical and quasi-mythical. It lives with the things and asks them out for a walk or a spook. Mobile yet wandering, wandering yet winding, winding yet twist, twist yet pervert, pervert yet degenerate, degenerate yet fast, fast yet immobile, mobile yet immobile. Where do we stand when we understand? Physically, mainly on ground, yet etymologically right in the midst. Our bodies wandering on Earth's bodies, itself wandering with other bodies. When astronomy is thought to be the study of the heavenly and geology of the earthly bodies, with which gesture should architecture then imagine its invented, its artificial bodies? Shall it isolate or expose them, or shall it aim to make them known with each other, somewhere halfway? Reading about Greek's earliest philosophers, Thales or Anaximander, it would most probably be more of the latter kind. Following the motions of the cosmos, they founded their understanding in the act of seeing things in relation, one could say architectonically, and they began to study their nature somewhat similar as we do it today. And also somewhat similar thought Vitruvius in the Architectura, the only treatise on classical on architecture surviving from classical antiquity. When he pictured the beginning of the architectural activity, for him it was the discovery of fire that originally gave rise to the coming together of man, to the deliberative assembly, and to social intercourse. And as they kept coming together in greater numbers into one place, upright and gazing upon the splendor of the starry firmament, they began in that first assembly to construct shelters. People started to observe the abundance of the universe and to seize their place in it, over and over again. Vitruvius further divided architecture into three branches: the art of building, edificatio, gnomonics, the construction of timepieces, and mechanics, machinatio. For him the three shall act together to build with due reference to beauty, utility, and arguably foremost durability, as the latter also takes a defining role in the classical qualities of the prior. Following his writing, durability will be assured when foundations are carried down to the solid ground, a building anchored in the mainland. Terra firma was what the Romans called this land, as distinguished from islands, meaning dividing the hard or sound from the soft or noisy. Yet for Vitruvius, and up until the late 16th and early 17th century, still with Earth as its steady center. In the forefront of Copernicus' revolution, Galileo Galilei started to test this strength. Mechanically, the newfound Earth became just like the moon. Both were irregular, uneven, and very wavy. In Galileo's experiments and telescopic observations, bodies began to stress and strain. Matter mattered, and the formerly fixed Earth finally moved, as well as internally. His, as well as the discoveries of several of his contemporaries, initiated the post-Aristotelian, Newtonian, and prospectively the modern way of thinking about architectural statics, where buildings henceforth were and are brought and secured in equilibrium with and within their environment, questing not for lesser solidity, just looking for it somewhere else. The emerging natural sciences mobilized their ancestral foundations and left René Descartes ultimately with nothing but one promise for a human certainty. Archimedes, Galileo's disciple, used to demand just one firm and immovable point in order to shift the entire Earth. So I too can hope for great things if I manage to find just one thing, however slight it is certain and unshakable. And he prominently found himself as the last solid ground to stand and build upon. Yet, doing so in reference to philosopher Michel Serres, he too misjudged the solidity he claimed, overheard one constant sound. No matter how clean or firm a foundation might be built, noise will always be part of the house, is always already there. And even the natural findings brought forward by the scientific methods, for example Galileo's, imagined as progressing from belief towards truth, were, if you follow just some of Paul Feyerabend's excursions into the anarchic, already not as ordered as they may pretend to be, were, without undermining their value, already mixed and respectively included the unordered or irrational too. In architecture, however, we continuously and even particularly reanimated today tend to think similar, to measure the durability, beauty and utility of our buildings, even statically indeterminate in terms of logical or material truth, meaning trying to get rid of noise. Even though already Vitruvius' writing allows a reading of architecture and communication at their very first spark, being rather about chances than about safety. Today we still often remain in the manners of solidity, purity and cleanliness, but asking with Serres, where do we put the dirt and how do we treat the wetlands? One always swims in the same river, one never sits down on the same bank. Fluctuation, disorder, opacity and noise. The representation of time and motion has been a persistent theme throughout architectural history, but today's often very literal handling of architecture as real estate, however, looking for its proper place, its proper form, offers potentially no state of the art other than being the art of the state, fixed and somewhat biased about life. And the question re-arises, how then actually can we architecturally relate to forms of mobility at all, when building an object would mean to consequently immobilize or ground it? Undoubtedly, to build certain structures of stability is one of architecture's main ambitions, yet without just swapping over or mobilizing it, as for example in postmodernism, by replacing pure with hybrid, clean with compromising, and straightforward with distorted, as Robert Venturi suggested it. Without giving up the articulated in favor of the purely ambiguous, on a digital continent, architecture has to re-evaluate its general basis of assessment, or differently, get ecstatic about its very own static in order not to be dismissed by it. Without necessarily seeking to legitimize or to reconcile, ancient rhetorics already knew a way to resolve such disputes. They established what they called stasis, a standing still, a different kind of stability. The word stasis shares its root sta, meaning to stand, with the word stability, statics, or standard, but is also familiar with constitution via its variant stit. It basically marks the place where two opposing forces come together, where they agree to disagree on what is at stake. It brings stability in the sense that what is in between is a necessary contrast with both extremes, making a somewhat mediating, yet not forceless ground to actively balance each other out. In such a setup, the mobile and the immobile would be opposite movements, and the stasis would be the stability negotiating between them. Similar to Sayre's parasite, in establishing a stasis, we can leave the one way. The town makes noise, but the noise makes the town. It allows to skip some doubt and stays with the intellect. Allows to look through Galileo's telescope from both sides at once and to face a universe, finite yet unbound, helio yet geocentric, spectral or anicentric. That sounds somewhat absurd, and that is also what it partly is. But with information and the sciences dealing with it, we somehow entered a new setup, one embracing such paradoxes, allowing us to jump between the registers, between the schemes, to establish not an or and not an and, but a yet. The controversy about the permanence of objects of knowledge is truly entangled with how we put forward and think of our architectonic objects. Philosophy and architecture share ambitions in them. The English object and the German word for design, Entwurf, stand even literally very close to each other. They are both acts of putting or throwing something before or against, are both interested in getting to know something in opposition, in some kind of figuration, or German Gestaltung, another translation of design. And having said that, there is also a characterization engendered by both subjects rooting in such paradoxical setup, taking the form of mobile statues like the Daedalus crafted by the mythical first architect Daedalus. Daedalus was an artist and a cunning inventor who didn't just create labyrinths and wings, but also built sculptures so lively that they had to be tied down in order not to run away. They circulated the Greek polis as aesthetic, intellectual, and ultimately playful figures. In many ancient accounts, they marked qualities such as the magic, the ritual, as well as the exotic. One could say they were somewhat strange, somewhat not really from here, but from where then were they, and asking contemporarily, where would they come from or go to when not tied down? Daedalus is a legendary figure, and yet Socrates called him his ancestor, making him coeval with the already mentioned pre-Socratic philosophers. Taking Anaximander's perspective then, one would see that every act of coming into or leaving life, German, entstehen or vergehen, is a process of differentiation or de-differentiation from the apeiron, the boundless, an archaic anything. It can be seen in relation with Aristotle's notion of the now, who built up on Anaximander's scheme as an act of inventing or destroying of a stasis. Reading Aristotle's physics, now probabilistically, one could imagine a time having continuity comparable with the continuous ground of the continents, and the now as a middle point connecting as well as dividing it, in what we could call the time past and the time to come. Or in case of a continent, mainland, holding together but also enclosing. Further the now is what he calls a boundary, hence becomes a somewhat temporary point outside of time. And Aristotle also defines it indirectly in terms of the limit in his metaphysics, as the furthest part of each thing and the first point outside which no part of a thing can be found, and the first point within which all parts are contained. Inspired by this line of thinking, we can think contemporarily of a now as a quantized point freed from the line, spectral and somehow ubiquitous, not continuous but contingent, and of there being potentially many of them. Building further upon Aristotle's definition of the limit, we can formulate one for the boundless too. It is the furthest part of each thing and the first point outside which a part of a thing can be found. Another paradox, yet the productive one. Because rendered in that way, the time past and the time to come somewhat collapses, and not into a singularity, instead contrarily into a fullness, an enormous stock. In an alteration of Maxime Duchamp's words, one could say this history is like Janus. It has two faces. Whether it looks at the past or at the future, it sees the same things. Such an abundant history is embracing the cultured as well as the savage, the known as well as the unknown. It might be the place where the statues are when not here at the time, and the now could be the place to recall or simply to call them. As contemporaries, we do not ask anymore what is new. We ask what is now. Now, invention and discovery are synonymous. Look and find at the same place. They are both attracted by the currently unnoticed and unperceived, are both processes of remembering, of unforgetting the knowable, a kind of archaeology augmenting the given. The apeiron is a rich abstraction, a multiplicity indefinite in kind, comparable to how we can think of information today. Any act of rationalizing starts in subtracting, in domesticating the exuberant, just as a voice transcends the noise in nowadays communication devices and yet is composed of it. Here and there one could not say something without anything already being there, however we might have gotten into this universe, but today it seems that nothing comes from nothing, just as in the worlds of Parmenides or Lucretius. Nevertheless, applied here not as a principle of causality, but substantially of mass. The complex surrounds us just as much as it imbues us. We are full of it, en masse, which is what makes us kind of boundless too. Hence, living and consequently building in the realm of information can hardly be a cleaning or collecting, nor a visualizing, and also lesser an animating, as with Greg Lynn, but rather a living with, being guest as well as host of the universal hotel, the universal interior of life. An interior which characterizes itself here not in opposition to an exterior, but rather mixed with it, like maybe an extensive interior or a space to be lived with, in the words of Susan K. Langer. Here we think and do and think, and here we craft artifacts, well-made products of human inventiveness. What makes a fact and what makes an artifact, and how do they relate into each other? One kind of mobility put forward by Daedalus statues is the ability to transport states from one place to another. The second, inverted one, is the freedom to embody differences while standing still or being here, wherever the case may be. In 1970, biochemist Chuck Monod wrote, "A rock, a mountain, a river, or a cloud. These are natural objects, a knife, a handkerchief, a car. So many artificial objects, artifacts. Analyze these judgments, however, and it will be seen that they are neither immediate nor strictly objective. Consequently, they are not strictly subjective either." Monod referred to them as strange too, but trying to think it inverted now, we could also call them ambivalent, etymologically having strengths on both sides, foreign and familiar, somehow similar to us. Here we meet, and one could say they become architectural objects to be lived with. Mobile statues within touch or sight are like wonders to behold, concrete yet abstract, hence not just of purpose, but purposeful. Similar and different to other memorial as committed to memory and search of lost time representations, they are treasuries for something which is and is not fully to be found inside of them. They have intrinsic as well as instrumental value, are always partly exceeding that what can be perceived at the time, which is what makes their body again similar to us, not fully congruent with its content, but possibilitates it, grants it with a certain openness, to stand in and to hold place for things one can get in touch with, a degree of anonymity. Anonymity yet not in the sense of a reduced or increased differentiability, a facelessness or indecipherability, but as an abstract similarity, a facefulness. And it is this anonymity which gives them their autonomy, what allows them to become more than what they are, to abstract from a specific role into a more generic or generous figure, into something your eyes can see and your mind can measure over and over again. As addressed by Le Corbusier, it involves a kind of pragmatism, yet a different one than we usually think of, a stasiatic kind of activity or praxis, a form of communication, dance or play to relate to them. We talk and they talk too. There are several recorded ways of how Daedalus statues had a voice. One of them takes the form of inscriptions, letters running up and down their legs, making them fast. Greece's earliest epigraphers encoded them to bear a voice in poetic words. If usually the architect is more likely to be known as a sculptor, so as to fashion stationary statues that stand on their same base as pictured by pre-Socratic poet Pindar, and the poet himself is a maker of works that travel, in mobile statues they bring together their knowledge, meet in their craft, sculpting figures of chance and necessity. Hence talking to them is neither clear, not purely smart, but it is sophisticated. Yes, impure in a way. They hear many voices, embody many times. One could say they have seen a lot, know a lot. And contrarily to immobile statues, as Pindar pictured them, one could see communicating with them in reference to literature theorist Roland Barthes as a weaving of voices in an indefinite and partially reversible way, as crafting music. In his analysis of a short story by Balzac, Barthes established codes as a kind of network through which the entire text passes, or rather in passing, becomes text. And he continues, the code is a perspective of quotations, a mirage of structures. The units which have resulted from it, those who inventory themselves always ventures out. They are so many fragments of something that has always been already. The code is the wake of that already. Daedalus trigger us to remember massively, to partly see through them. Knowledge in there, as well as in reference to Michel Serres, is thus the ability to listen and to translate the scattered languages of things. Hence to have a voice, German Mündigkeit, includes to have an ear too, is not just a given, but an intellectual practice in the sense that to grasp something implies that we reach for it, an ableness to address, whatever the case may be. A self exists in a cloud of relations that is now complex and mobile. In the terms of the digital, we are dwelling in what we could call a contingent present, involving the chance to do basically everything. And as such, it becomes somewhat lesser about what you do and a bit more about how you do what you do, not techno or methodologically, but in terms of gesture, which of course includes technique, and the what in form and feeling again, sophistication. Beyond a certain degree of tendencies and capacities, of externalizing our inside, it is a different game. It's about finding ourselves in the outside over and over again, not anymore about behavior, but about attitude. And the same counts for the artifact. The mobile yet immobile informs the spectral body of architecture, embodies and disembodies what architecture is capable of. And designing, just as living with buildings, becomes a question of movement of the body, or a part of it, intended to express a thought or feeling, to dance and communicate, and of pose or style, as it is by the principle of style that they, the body and its parts, we and them, are above all coordinated and stabilized, or base. For Vitruvius, architecture's first dependency was order, cosmos, and buildings measured and measuring, mobile yet immobile, look for order between movement and fixity, between heaven and earth, opening up spaces of everyday life while having an eye on the world at large. Invented objects, not afraid, but inspired by the unknown, not real estate, but real likeness, or mobile statues. Originality fades and personality appears, or in the words of art historian Ernst Gombrich, it is very difficult to explain in words what makes a style, but it is far less difficult to see. I very much invite you to also have a look on the 3 volumes we worked on in the classes, the report on the mobile, our first catalog of mobile statues, and the one we're currently putting together, the report on the mobile, and to further follow the work in the Daedalus Observatory. Thank you.